This is Women Road Warriors with Shelley Johnson and Kathy Tuccaro. From the corporate office to the cab of a truck, they're here to inspire and empower women in all professions. So gear down, sit back, and enjoy.
Welcome. We're an award-winning show dedicated to empowering women in every profession through inspiring stories and expert insights. No topics off limits on our show. We power women on the road to success with expert and celebrity interviews and information you need. I'm Shelley.
And this is Kathy.
More women than you think are stuck in destructive relationships. Many have a tough time breaking free emotionally even after they've left. There's a reason for that. Breaking trauma bonds is tough. Dr. Laura Copley is a trauma expert and helps her clients heal from past trauma that keeps them trapped. She offers an insider's perspective on toxic relationships and helps create healing opportunities. She's the author of Loving You is Hurting Me, a new approach to healing trauma bonds and creating authentic connections. A key focus of her book is on cultivating post-traumatic growth. Laura doesn't stop at addressing the healing of trauma. She guides the reader toward a path of positive transformation, both in their personal lives and in their relationships. It's a valuable workbook that offers steps to heal from complex trauma. We have Laura on the show with us today to learn more. Welcome, Laura. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I'm so excited to be on your show today.
Well,
welcome.
Yes, this is going to be quite the topic. We discuss this sort of thing off and on, but it still can be a curiosity, and it's so complicated. What is complex trauma? And why is it some of us stay entangled with a toxic relationship even after we've left it? You know, it almost feels like it's Stockholm Syndrome or something. Would that be a good description?
So Stockholm Syndrome is certainly an extreme example of the trauma bond. It is this dynamic that happens when we form this very deep emotional attachment to our abuser, and that abuser has isolated us. And the way that we use it is this abuser has kidnapped you and has isolated you in that sort of way. So Stockholm Syndrome is absolutely an extreme version of trauma bonding. And but we also can see trauma bonding on a continuum. And on these more mild variations of the trauma bond, we can see two individuals with two different trauma stories that are impacting their identity, they're impacting how they cope, they're impacting how they're showing up in relationships. They're grounded in fear, relationships that are grounded in fear instead of trust. And they replicate these old, painful attachment cycles of codependency and enmeshment, and have a lot of toxic qualities to it, lots of arguing and shutting down and controlling behaviors and micromanaging and numbing out. So on the mild version, we have these trauma influences, complex trauma that is playing out in relationships that we actually want to work out, but we lack the skills and the coping mechanisms and the individual healing that we need to do in order to show up in those relationships in healthier ways. Okay. And then, of course, you get to these extreme versions like Stockholm Syndrome and domestic violence too, which is highly dangerous, red flags. And when things like that happen, I work with those clients on, we need to get you safe. We need to get out of this relationship.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it does seem that people get on a continuum and they keep finding the same type of partner. They go from one bad relationship to the next, and then they hate themselves. It's like, what am I doing wrong?
Yep, I can attest to that. I went from bad to worse.
I've had my share of adventures as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And in my book, Loving You is Hurting Me, every chapter I talk a little bit about my story and some of the things that in my own relationship that had so much enmeshment and codependency entangled in it. I also outline, I don't identify as somebody that is controlling and manipulative and all of those things, but I was selfish. And in my relationships, in overcoming and having this perspective of looking back into my past relationships, I had a role in why we had a codependent bond. And I think it's important in our work, if we are replicating these relationships, it's not just why are these certain people attracted to me? It's what is in me that I have not recognized yet that I am trying to fulfill in these relationships. So, for example, some of the work that I do a lot with women and this natural caretaking role that they go in, which is absolutely exhausting, and so they'll attract partners who need to be babied and taken care of, and then those partners, for example, um, uh, become dependent on them for doing all the work, and these women are just getting burned out. So we have these like mild variations of I am bonded to through you because of my past attachment trauma. So the trauma bond, I'm bonded through attachment. And my book helps us dive deeper into why we do what we do, why we replicate what we replicate.
Oh, that's so important. Because I think a lot of people feel like they're just bouncing off of walls, running around in circles. They can't identify why they're doing this. And then, of course, maybe they'll get messages from their friends and family members like, wow, you're an accident waiting to happen. I mean, you'll hear this kind of stuff.
Absolutely. So in my very first relationship, we met when I was 18 years old. We met when I was very young. We stayed together up until I was 30. So going through your 20s with somebody, in my family of origin, I had to be the hero. I was born into a family where both of my parents felt like they were, they lived an unfulfilled life. They felt like they um, didn't complete their mission. And so they looked to me to kind of give their life meaning. And so I was the adventurer. I was the one that was going into graduate school and becoming a doctor and doing like all of this world travel. So in my relationship, I was very focused on how do I keep this momentum going? And that appeared self-centered in a way. It appeared very avoidant. I had a hard time with intimacy. I had a hard time slowing down. I had a hard time um, bridging really deep emotional connection and being present and having this sense of like home because I was always ready. Well, somebody else needs me. I have to make this look good. And that attracted a kind of person who was an enabler and who was like the role's a little bit opposite. He was the caretaker and he brought in his own attachment wounds where he thought that he just had to self-sacrifice for somebody else. And we met. And in a way, in its own twisted way, it worked for a long time until it didn't. And I became lonely and he became burdened. And then it fell apart. And it's only now in, my later 30s being able to look back and actually write about this, where it's like, it wasn't just him that was quote unquote the bad guy. We were replicating patterns from our origin story the only way that we knew how. Yeah.
So does everything, when we're in destructive relationships as an adult, does it always go back to childhood?
I don't think so. I think in most cases, we can start to see early influences of patterns that were instilled because in our childhood, that's where our first sip of identity formation starts to occur.
Mhm.
Our parents teach us how and why we're worthy. So if we have parents that really celebrate us when we perform well, when we get that A, when we excel at sports or something like that, if that's how, yeah, for better or worse, if that's how we see them light up, then we will tend to be a performer and a doer and that sort of thing. And we can see those influences then carrying out into, well, when I need to be a doer and a fixer in my relationship, and I really don't know how to be taken care of. I don't know how to be the receiver. So we can see some early attachment influences that then possibly then get exacerbated in more extreme ways in adulthood. And in adulthood, sometimes we get that first taste of a quote unquote toxic relationship where somebody takes those gifts and those tendencies for granted And that's when they start getting exaggerated and elaborated and toxic and possibly abusive.
Well, it's almost like some of these people that you encounter, if you've got some trauma bond issues, it's almost like you're a magnet.
I was just going to say that because, I mean, given my history of abuse since I've been very little, I was a complete magnet to anybody that was, not as savory as they should.
The unfortunate reality with the human condition, when we haven't been given the opportunity to really heal and self-reflect, the unfortunate reality is we are drawn to something that is familiar, not something that is safe. We think we're drawn to safety, but when we really dive in and look a little bit more, we're confusing safety with what is familiar. And sometimes that familiar is chaos and something that is sort of deliciously toxic. This very warped pleasure, pain, complex duality.
I spent a total of 2 years from 40 to 42 in 3 separate phases at this women's center called Wellsprings. It was a faith-based program where I literally had to unlearn 40 years of brainwashing, and I had to relearn who I was, because I honestly, even though I was 40, I had no clue. I didn't know what I liked, what I didn't like, what what was good for me or what wasn't good. And I've said this before, but I mean, I had to ask my counselor the very first day when she was talking about boundaries. I'm like, what's that? Or codependency. I had to take a whole class on that. And I'm like, huh? And then recognizing like, oh my God, and how enmeshed, like you said earlier, enmeshed I was with my partners and doing everything based on them.
But that first step can be so scary when all you know is codependency and enmeshment. When I don't know the difference between myself and my partner, there's almost this entanglement of identity that when my partner feels something, then I'm responsible for that feeling. So it's really scary to step outside of the only thing that you know and be alone, and then learn these important skills like boundaries and saying no. And we think that boundaries is all about like, hey, I have a rule and I need you to listen to it. But really what boundaries are this is how I respect myself. And the more you respect your own boundaries, the more other people will listen. Because unfortunately, this world likes to push boundaries to see how much they get away with.
Oh, gosh.
And it's so empowering. Like, oh my God, to be able to stand up and say, hey, no, I'm sorry. No, this isn't working, or whatever it is.
Right.
I know, like my therapist, she had me practice. I was dating my husband, the man I ended up marrying at the time. And she had me practice saying no to him, making dates and then canceling and not explaining why, just saying, no, not tonight. Or whatever. And it was like training grounds for a 40-year-old. But you know what? It was so liberating and empowering to myself to say, hey, I can finally do this. And oh man, best thing ever.
Best thing ever. And that's the trick. Like what I can even hear it in your voice. Like you are liberated within. It's not just about, hey, are people listening to me now? Are people that I'm in relationships, are they listening to my boundaries now? That's important. But it is the liberation of what has been blocked in you, what has been not allowed. It's finally giving yourself permission to be adaptable and flexible with yourself. And what you unlock is, I finally trust myself in saying no. No's not scary anymore. Or like the ability, hey, please stop. I don't like that. That's not good for me. That's no longer scary. It's empowered. It's like that's just a matter of fact.
And it's also, it even boils down to going to the grocery store and deciding what food I want to eat.
It does.
Right? Like little things. What do I want to watch on TV? Or decisions. I'll ask your opinion, but I'm not basing my choice on what you think. Right?
Yeah.
It's a complete freedom to me. It's like, oh my God.
It reminds me of that. Gosh, I haven't seen this movie in years. But remember the Julia Roberts Runaway Bride?
Yeah.
There's a scene in there where she's sampling all these different types of eggs, like how she likes her eggs cooked, because for the longest time, she's just had her eggs the same way that her partners have had them. And then she sits down, and I believe it's Runaway Bride, and she is sampling all the different ways you could cook an egg. And by the end of it, she's like, I don't like eggs, period. Brings it down as simple as that. What do I like? And then honoring that. I don't want it at all, if it's that.
Stay tuned for more of Women Road Warriors coming up.
Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I have one question for you. Do you want to stop worrying about the IRS? If the answer is yes, then look no further. I've been around for years. I've helped countless people across the country, and my success rate speaks for itself. So now you know where to find good, honest help with your tax problems. What are you waiting for? If you owe more than $10,000 to the IRS or haven't filed in years, call me now at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com for a free consultation and get your life back.
Industry movement Trucking Moves America Forward is telling the story of the industry. Our safety champions, the women of trucking, independent contractors, the next generation of truckers, and more. Help us promote the best of our industry. Share your story and what you love about trucking. Share images of a moment you're proud of. And join us on social media. Learn more at truckingmovesamerica.com.
Welcome back to Women Road Warriors with Shelley Johnson and Kathy Tuccaro.
If you're enjoying this informative episode of Women Road Warriors, I wanted to mention Kathy and I explore all kinds of topics that will power you on the road to success. We feature a lot of expert interviews. Plus, we feature celebrities and women who've been trailblazers. Please check out our podcast at womenroadwarriors.com and click on our episodes page. We're also available wherever you listen to podcasts, on all the major podcast channels like Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Amazon Music, Audible, you name it. Check us out and bookmark our podcast. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn, YouTube, and other sites. And tell others about us. We want to help as many women as possible. There are many kinds of trauma bonds. Some are mild and some are extreme, like what happens with Stockholm Syndrome, where you form a deep emotional attachment with your abuser who isolates you. Trauma bonds impact a victim's identity, how a person copes, how a person shows up in relationships. These people are grounded in fear instead of trust and replicate old attachment cycles of codependency and enmeshment that have toxic qualities like shutting down, micromanaging, and numbing out. People in these situations lack the skills to show up in relationships in healthier ways and tend to repeat toxic relationship patterns. Dr. Laura Copley is a trauma expert and helps her clients heal from past trauma that keeps them trapped. She offers an insider's perspective on toxic relationships and helps create healing opportunities. She's the author of Loving You is Hurting Me, a new approach to healing trauma bonds and creating authentic connections. A key focus of her book is on cultivating post-traumatic growth. She helps women in all situations dive deeper into why they do what they do. Because when we haven't been able to really heal and self-reflect, we're drawn to what's familiar, which can be chaotic and toxic. Dr. Copley helps free us. Dr. Copley, you have some really great insights that you've been sharing with us and what people need to look for inside of themselves. It's getting to know yourself all over again, really, when you think about it, and you're helping people do that. I was wondering how many people have trauma bonding. These things weren't discussed decades ago.
No.
Is this common?
It is. It's common. And I think the way that I've in a way commandeered the buzzword trauma bond, because when you walk up and down the aisle of, your favorite bookstore and you read these books around the trauma bond, it is very abuser victim messaging.
Mm-hmm.
And which absolutely 100% happens. Those books need to be there. It absolutely happens. But I commandeered it because I think what we're doing is a little bit of an injustice to those that have these more mild to moderate variations of the trauma bond, where they are bringing in unhealed aspects of themselves, reacting from those complex traumas and those attachment wounds, reacting from them. It's manifesting in the relationship, and it's pulling out our partner's unhealed wounds. And we're creating a lot of tension and toxicity and not knowing how to repair or heal. And so I look at all of this on the spectrum. So I would say they're more common than maybe somebody who just uses the word trauma bond for something like Stockholm Syndrome.
Sure. Now, attachment wounds, what exactly are those?
Yes. So attachment wounds come from there's a little bit of psychology 101 introduction of attachment theory, which was done by this man last name Bowlby, who recognized that children, depending on the level of security and safety and consistency and affection that they were receiving and how they were receiving it, they developed certain coping mechanisms and behavioral mechanisms that could be seen in early childhood. So parents who were more dismissive and avoidant impacted how their child was able to connect with other people and how they were able to feel safe in the world. Similarly, if there were parents that were hyper fixated and very anxious, it would create a different kind of attachment wound in that child. So when I refer to attachment wounds, I'm referring to how a child learned that they were good, safe, loved, valued, and important just for who they are in that sort of unconditional way, versus if there were some sort of condition to when they were good or bad.
So someone trying to break free of trauma bonding and attachment wounds. I see in your book you have a section on reparenting the self and moving towards self-trust.
Yeah.
There would be really serious trust issues if a person doesn't really know how to relate to someone. Say they had a parent that really, like you said, was dismissive, maybe didn't praise them and reward them in some way if they did a really good job. They're going to be really looking for approval all the time and not trusting themselves.
Exactly. And that if you like reading the book, the secret sauce that I call it is self-trust, because it's not just I don't trust other people. It's I don't trust myself to know if I'm doing this right. And that's why we get reactive in our relationships, or why we shut down and withdraw and people please and placate and have these really loose boundaries. There is some level of I don't trust in my emotions. I don't trust what I need. I don't know if I'm too much or too little. So I am going to really rely on somebody else to tell me what I am. And so the reparenting of the self is learning how to tend to that part of ourselves that is still childlike. I don't know who I am yet, like a child. And learning how to affirm and validate and comfort and reassure and encourage and uplift that part of ourselves that maybe never was as we grew up, or not done well enough. Even well-meaning parents might not get this completely right because they have their own story.
Well, there are a lot of parents today I've seen, they're kind of like helicopter parents. And they're doing everything and protecting their children. You can't really do that either, because the world is not a kind place. You need to be able to think on your feet and be able to have the strength within yourself to trust your decisions.
Yes. And that leads to, at times, an anxious attachment, because that child does not know how to build their internal resiliency to be okay without that parent. They are relying on that parent to ensure that they don't fall, they don't make a mistake. And so when we're looking for what we call a secure attachment, what we know is children who are unconditionally loved, they are validated, they are respected, they are listened to, their emotions are real. What we know is when parents see children as real people, no, not as adults, but as like people, real creatures with real feelings, and they tend to those things, we actually see children taking more risks, doing more things on their own. They trust themselves more to leave the nest and then to return because they know that there's a place they can come back to that's safe. The more secure of the attachment, the more independent the child.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's difficult to go through life if you don't trust yourself. And I think women, especially, there can be more self-doubt. We certainly suffer more, I think, from imposter syndrome and that sort of thing. If you don't have the proper self-trust, which can happen with reparenting, it can be very self-defeating throughout life.
It can be, and there are certain there are certain feminine qualities that might be natural about us that gets taken for granted and abused and then expected. So, our ability, our tendency, I don't mean to gender stereotype because absolutely it can exist in other ways too. But our ability to have emotional intelligence, to understand other people's perspective, our stronger ability to emotionally communicate and process in the moment, our tendency to be nurturers and really a sense of home that we have. Just children feel home with us, men feel at home with us. That at times gets abused and taken for granted and pushed to an extreme. And then all of a sudden, something that is natural about us is then tainted and we become people pleasers. We lose our own self-agency and autonomy for others. So our gift is then tainted and manipulated by culture and society and the patriarchy and all of that jazz. And it gets painted, and then all of a sudden, that's what is expected of us. Like, heaven forbid, we have our own voice and our own needs and our own time and our own space that we need.
So you never get to know yourself. Yeah, you're living everybody else's life.
And ensuring everybody else is okay. What do I need to do more of to ensure everybody else is okay?
Sure.
I'm so glad I'm not like that anymore. Holy man.
Yeah. Empathy is a good thing. That's actually a virtue, but it can be really used against us.
Exactly.
If we don't know who we are inside.
Exactly. And sometimes what I find is as individuals are doing, quote unquote, the work, for a time, they'll pendulum swing the other way because they feel like they need to learn that other side. So they might become hyper independent. They might be more, self-focused for which they should be, but a pendulum swings the other way because they need to learn that skill. And then what we find as they're learning is they soften then back into this like homeostasis where they can be both empathetic and independent. They can do things for the greater good, but also take time for themselves and require their own self-care. So it's this holding of the bothness and knowing that you're worth being both. You don't have to choose between being selfish or people-pleasing. It's neither one of those extremes.
Sure. Yeah. Being able to have a happy medium. That would be knowing moderation. Anything, even lots of good stuff. I mean, lots of empathy. Well, then there's self-sacrifice there. You don't want too much of any of it, really. It's a matter of striking a happy medium.
And then how that happy medium fits in the individual. Because my happy medium might not be your happy medium, and that's okay.
Right.
Stay tuned for more of Women Road Warriors coming up.
Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I have one question for you. Do you want to stop worrying about the IRS? If the answer is yes, then look no further. I've been around for years. I've helped countless people across the country, and my success rate speaks for itself. So now you know where to find good, honest help with your tax problems. What are you waiting for? If you owe more than $10,000 to the IRS or haven't filed in years, call me now at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com for a free consultation and get your life back.
Industry movement Trucking Moves America Forward is telling the story of the industry. Our safety champions, the women of trucking, independent contractors, the next generation of truckers, and more. Help us promote the best of our industry. Share your story and what you love about trucking. Share images of a moment you're proud of. And join us on social media. Learn more at truckingmovesamerica.com.
Welcome back to Women Road Warriors with Shelley Johnson and Kathy Tuccaro.
Trauma bonds are more common than you think, and it's not always an abuse victim scenario. There are people who have a more mild version of a trauma bond where they bring in unhealed aspects of themselves to a relationship. They react from their attachment wounds and past experiences, which create havoc in a relationship because it pulls out their partner's unhealed wounds. Humans react based on how we were treated as a child. We need to develop self-trust, reassurance, and internal resilience through reparenting. This is just part of what Dr. Laura Copley addresses. She's the author of Loving You is Hurting Me, a new approach to healing trauma bonds and creating authentic connections. A key focus of her book is on cultivating post-traumatic growth. She's been sharing her insight with us. Laura, your information is terrific. You've got a lot of good stuff in your book. You've got the toxic hook and breaking free of painful patterns, as well as trauma transformation and creating purpose, along with the pathway mindset. You got a lot of stuff here.
There's a lot of stuff.
What is the toxic hook and how do we break free of those painful patterns?
Yeah. So, I'm going to speak to your comment on like, there's a lot here. So first and foremost, this book is a guide. It's not meant to be something that you read like in one sort of mass swoop. There are exercises and workbooks. You're supposed to take this slow, and every chapter is like a self-therapy session. So you're supposed to sit with it and go slow, as opposed to just like cramming it all in. When you reach sort of like the halfway point, we're really going to start implementing the things that we have worked on with our origin story, our reparenting, our inner child, and we're going to start applying it to how that's showing up in our relationships. So the toxic hook is my visualization that's in the book on what is actually happening as a dynamic and a pattern in your relationships where you both are probably triggering each other. Now, this does not apply to those very extreme, dangerous situations for like that Stockholm syndrome, domestic violence. This is for those relationships where two people who have experienced attachment injuries, complex trauma, who don't know themselves, who are connecting out of fear and codependency and enmeshment as opposed to respect and safety and love and trust. This is the pattern that is happening in that relationship. And when you know your pattern and your role in the pattern and why you're doing it, you can slow the pattern down enough that you can start doing new things at each stage of the cycle. So, for example, if something is potentially triggering, let's say there's some sort of activating event, somebody there is worried about disconnection in the relationship. Oh God, like here it comes again. It's already going to start. You can feel it. We're about to have another fight. More than likely, that is an indicator that something deep within you who doesn't trust yourself is triggered. You're afraid of your partner abandoning you. You're afraid of betrayal. You're afraid of that something unfair and injustice is about to happen. You're afraid that your partner's going to reject you. Something is about to happen. But instead of slowing down and saying, hey, I'm feeling vulnerable, I'm scared right now, we go into a reactive defense mechanism, which I call a trauma imprint. And that trauma imprint is how we handle being scared and vulnerable. And as adults, we might name call, we might get loud, we might get verbally aggressive, we might emotionally shut down, we might stonewall and act like we don't care, we might numb out. There's so many different things that we do, but it is those behaviors then that then trigger our partner. And our partner's in a place of, oh God, she's rejecting me. Oh God, she's, coming in feeling, she's being really critical. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. So their attachment trauma is then triggered. And then they go into their reactive behavior. So every step of the way is how we're triggering each other. And then the self-fulfilling prophecy is, hey, now you're disconnected. The thing that you were afraid of happened.
And there's no communication. It accelerates.
there's no depth communication. The communication with there is accusatory and shaming and argumentative, and not actually deep or attuned to what the real issue is that's going on.
Yeah, it turns into a nasty, vicious debate. It's like, I'm gonna one up you with this insult. You know?
Yeah, it's about one-upping. It's about drawing a line in the sand, who's right, who's wrong, who's good and who's bad. And that's not going anywhere. So nobody can be the bad guy.
No. So it's a matter of really looking and stopping that behavior, breaking free of the painful patterns.
Yes, it's about knowing each stage of the pattern represents something deeper that's going on with you. And if you can honor what is happening at the deeper level, it's more than likely more vulnerable than what you're coming off as, which is probably, mean and uncaring and nasty or something like that. At the deeper level, we're hurt and scared. And I guarantee that in the majority of cases, unless you're in a highly abusive relationship with a narcissist or a psychopath and or abuser, but in most cases, if somebody's a good person at heart, I guarantee they're going to approach you more if you are vulnerable than if you're coming off as sensitive and critical. You're more approachable in your vulnerability.
Yeah, with a narcissist, there's no way to communicate.
No,
Impossible.
do not give them your vulnerability.
Nope. I married one. Oh, good.
This book is for the individual or the couple that are being caught within the patterns of their complex trauma. They might be good people at their core, but they do not know how to do intimacy and vulnerability because they have been taught in the past that it's unsafe or they will be hurt.
Okay.
And that's also, they are bonded through their trauma. So they're reenacting those old patterns.
Is this part of the trauma transformation to create purpose and working toward the pathway mindset? You have different chapters on those topics.
Yes. So when you get later into the book, so section 1 of the book is about understanding why we do what we do. So this is when we're in deep self-reflection around how we were raised, our origin story, how we learned that we had worth or value, what kind of role that we took in our family of origin, if we were the hero or the golden child or the scapegoat child or the lost child. So part 1 is all about understanding why we do what we do. Part 2, which is where the toxic hook is what is it that's happening in my relationships now? My most recent relationships, my most current relationship, where some of this is still reacting and still at play, and what can I do about it? And then the third part of the book is on post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is the ability to transform your trauma into these greater gifts for life that actually transcends you into a more evolved state of being than you would have if the trauma didn't happen to you in the first place. It's a little bit of a taboo subject, but I touch it because I think that hiding from this is also doing an injustice. This by no means is saying be thankful for your trauma. Like, yay, I'm so glad that I was abused for 10 years. Like, that's not what we're saying. It's saying if something happened to you, if this was part of your story, there is a way to use it so that you can reach, you can see the world through new possibilities. You can uncover untapped strengths. You can find a deeper ability to empathize with others. Sometimes people become more spiritual in a way. And there are these qualities that we can learn as a result of doing this sort of work.
Kind of like an awakening.
Yeah. We can stay in PTSD. We can get back to homeostasis, and kind of get back to normal, or we can transform and transcend and go through that awakening process too. And some of my work with my clients is we know that this phenomenon exists. We see it happening. We just don't completely understand why some experience it naturally and others still struggle with the PTSD stage. So my work is like, I want to help people learn how to do this.
You offer a way for people to thoroughly break free and
Really break free.
and become the person that they're supposed to be. Is that part of the pathway mindset that you talk about?
Yeah. So the pathway mindset is pretty elaborate. But it's basically an acronym that breaks down, it like simplifies things that for you just to think about, to remind yourself. So it's pathway. And I'm actually going to have to find my own book to look at it point by point. But pathway mindset is this ability to see the world almost like a spider web. So when you look at a spider web, you see a trail of the web and it ends, but it ends at a crossroad. It doesn't stop. You're not stuck. You turn. And then it builds and builds and builds. And that you see every stuck point that the spider stops at is just a place that he turned. There's never stagnation if you look at it through a pathway mindset. It's always an opportunity to pivot in your life and to grow. And when you can see life through this more aerial perspective pathway mindset, and you know that that's real, you know that that's how life works, it sets sort of this like internal resiliency within yourself of, this might suck right now, but I'm going to be okay.
So it gives people hope.
It gives people hope. It's like a spider web of hope, as opposed to focusing down and being hyper focused on how bad it is right now and how this has ruined your life and you can't get out of it and you can't escape and this just destroyed you, as opposed to looking at it in that short-term way. It's a reminder to go aerial perspective and say, this is where I pivot, and it's hard, and I can do it with a choke in my throat and tears running down my face, but I can still pivot looking like that and feeling like that.
It's a metamorphosis. People can think of themselves as a caterpillar and they turn into a butterfly at the other end of the road or the tunnel as they grow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so important because so many people live without really having their full potential because of these things that have gotten in the way that they're not even aware of.
Yeah, and they're taught to fear pain.
Yes.
They're taught to fear stuck, as opposed to knowing like, hey, pain is the burn when you're building a muscle. Like, I don't have to like it. I don't really love running that much at the gym. It hurts. I'm tired. I don't want to. But I know that the more I push myself, there is this endurance that is built. When I go to the gym and I'm adding weight, when I'm lifting, the burn, the pain is what is building the muscle. You don't have to like it, but you got to know it.
No pain, no gain, unfortunately. That's part of life. You're giving a wonderful structure and roadmap for people who are reading this book. And
Thank you.
how to discover themselves, it's self-discovery, and then manifesting their dreams in a way they've probably never been able to do, and having healthy relationships, which is something that they probably can't even identify until they really break it down. Do you have a couple pointers for our listeners on trauma bonds, how to really maybe start looking a little bit and doing some self-reflection on if they have these issues and how they can start making some improvements?
Yeah. So I'm going to find the language for this because I feel it in myself before I actually have words for it. But I think the thing that I would recommend first is to sit down with yourself and in your own quiet time and actually think about the last time you experienced that toxic dance, that argument, that reoccurring pattern of good guy, bad guy, invalidation, name calling, all the things that happen of just like, we're doing it again. We always do this. And so what I would sit down and think about for maybe the first time is, and this is hard, but what is my role in perpetuating that? This is really hard to do for some because by the nature of that toxic dance, by the nature of it is we don't want to be the bad guy, but we have to let go just for the exercise. We have to let go of the narrative that it has to be good and bad every single time that this happens. And I want you to think, when I act this way, when I criticize back or when I shut down, how is that trying to protect something in me that has been hurt and damaged? I want you to identify the coping mechanism behind why you react in that kind of extreme way. So instead of seeing it as bad, I want you to see it as adaptive. Because if you can see it for what it's trying to do, the good that it's trying to do, how it's trying to protect you or warn you or take care of you or save you, if you can identify why it's doing that, then we can learn how to do that strategy in a healthier way.
Makes total sense. Great advice.
Yep.
So the first thing the first thing is about, what is it that I do that I'm not that proud of? How is it actually trying to serve me? Even if it's not doing that great of a job, how is it actually trying to serve me? And if you can identify that, then what I want you to think about and brainstorm is, okay, how can I do that in a brand new way? So when I get critical, it's a way of protecting myself. Okay, if I need to protect something within me, that means there's something in me that is more vulnerable, because we only protect things that are vulnerable, right?
True.
Okay, so if I need to protect something, then I need to let somebody know, hey, I'm feeling really hurt right now. I can feel myself getting defensive. Can we slow down? That's a way that you can do it, instead of, you never think about me, you're always thinking about yourself. Instead of the aggression and the pointing of the finger, what does that protection mechanism, what is it actually trying to do? And let's actually disclose that to ourselves, at least.
Mm-hmm. Makes for healthier communication.
And being more honest with yourself. And again, it comes back to self-trust. Do you trust yourself to be vulnerable? Or are you in a relationship where it's not safe to do that? Because if that's the fact, we need to get out.
I bet that there are a lot of people that have that realization. It's like, wow, this was never good for me in the first place.
I was never going to be able to be vulnerable with you.
Yeah.
And they need that awareness.
Sure. So where do people find your book,
Yep.
Loving You is Hurting Me?
Yeah, so I would say the best place to find Loving You is Hurting Me is on Amazon. That's the thing that I probably encourage the most. In the States, you can go online at Barnes and Noble and Target. It's at various bookstores. But most reliably, I would say go on Amazon.
Excellent. Now, can people work with you virtually? Is there a website where people can reach out to you?
Yes. So I do psychoeducation workshops and coaching from time to time as well. So you can go to lauracopley.com for information on that. You can also find me on Instagram and TikTok at Doc Copley, DOCCOPLEY. And those are some of the ways that you can get more involved with, when I'm doing speaking engagements, when I'm holding another workshop, that sort of thing.
Excellent. You've gotten me thinking. I think that we all can do some self-reflection.
Absolutely.
This has been really, really informative. I appreciate it, Laura. This has been terrific.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great. I'd love to see where conversations go. This was really fun.
So many women are going to benefit from this. Oh my gosh. So many of our listeners.
Absolutely. And that's our objective, so that women can reach their full potential.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you again, Dr. Copley. It's been an honor having you on the show. We hope you've enjoyed this latest episode. And if you want to hear more episodes of Women Road Warriors or learn more about our show, be sure to check out womenroadwarriors.com. And please follow us on social media. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. On our website, we also have a selection of podcasts just for women. There are a series of podcasts from different podcasters. So if you're in the mood for women's podcasts, just click the Power Network tab on womenroadwarriors.com. You'll have a variety of shows to listen to anytime you want to. Podcasts made for women. Women Road Warriors is on all the major podcast channels like Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Audible, YouTube, and others. Check us out. And please follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Women Road Warriors with Shelley Johnson and Kathy Tuccaro. If you want to be a guest on the show or have a topic or feedback, email us at sjohnson@womenroadwarriors.com.